George Band was a very talented man. He was a very, very modest man as well. He just quietly got on with things, and he was very, very good at getting other people to work with him. He had a lovely little twinkle of humour around him as well. The challenges in 1953 were absolutely huge. Everest hadn't been climbed. Not only that, though, there was a kind of a very, very serious national pressure upon them. Of course, they'd made the reconnaissance under Eric Shipton in 1951. They'd found the way through the Western Cwm. The Swiss came in 1952, and the Swiss very nearly pulled it off. I mean, Lambert and Tenzing Norgay got to within just a few hundred feet of the south summit of Everest. And then the next year, when John Hunt was the leader, he knew that the French had it the following year. The French had very, very strong climbers. If they didn't get up it in 1953, they'd probably lost it. John Hunt was an absolutely brilliant leader. And as a very good leader, he knew the right person to whom to give different jobs. And George had a first-class kind of analytical mind. He was the youngest member of the team, and therefore you could give him very important jobs which, you know, the more senior members of the team, the people who wanted to get out in front, etc., probably wouldn't particularly enjoy doing, probably wouldn't do terribly well. George did them very well indeed. I think the interesting thing about the whole climbing thing is that on a mountain you're completely focused on the climb and you're doing it for the climb's sake. But if, of course, you've actually then been part of something that was very, very big and was of huge media interest, and of course 53 Everest Expedition was probably the biggest national event in climbing that's occurred in the history of British mountaineering. You go into this kind of frenzy of parties and press and everything else. I think it's great fun. I think it's very important though you don't let it get to your head, and I think as far as George was concerned, it most certainly didn't. The Kanchenjunga expedition was an amazing expedition. If you compare it to the 53 Everest expedition, which was extremely structured, needed to be, and very big, the Kanchenjunga expedition was very, very small. And Charles Evans wanted to run it more, as a kind of a traditional kind of climbing expedition of a group of climbing mates getting together to climb a mountain. And what they achieved with the size of the expedition, the fact that they were doing it from the bottom up without any kind of reconnaissance, was quite extraordinary. And here, I think, George, benefiting from his experience on Everest, just 2 years before, he was going extremely well, and so he was an absolute natural choice to climb with Joe Brown, who of course was on his first expedition, the rock climbing genius from working class background, and the two of them gelled very, very well indeed.
Well now, George, let's hear about this. I'm sure everyone's agog to hear about it.
Well, Joe and I drew matchsticks, and I drew the shortest, which meant that I slept in the worst place in the tent. It was overlapping on the outside.
I've heard of that sort of thing happening before.
we got away quite well next morning. I think perhaps the trickiest bit of the lot was the very last part of the climb. There was a steep nose of rock, and we went to the right round it, and there above us there were some vertical cracks in the wall, about 20 feet high. And Joe chose one of those and forced his way up.
Because it was just up his street.
Oh, he loves that sort of thing, yes, and sort of jamming a hand in and pulling up on it. And then he called back, "George, we're there." And up till then I had no idea that we were so close. And then I joined him, and the summit was just about 20 feet away from us. gently sloping cone of snow.
That really explains why you had to go so close to it to find out that you really could get
Yes, it does.
get to the top
yes.
you wanted to.
Yes.
Yes, I see. Well, now.
Kanchenjunga is a big, complex and potentially very dangerous mountain. I mean, it's a much more difficult mountain than Everest and much more dangerous. And so to actually be able to find your way up it on a first attempt is amazing. To me, climbing is all about finding new routes. The fascinating bit is actually the way you do it. It's actually the journey. It's actually finding your way. It's that spirit of discovery and exploration. And I'm quite sure that's one of the really strong kind of motivators that both Joe and George and the rest of the Kanchenjunga team had. I think George had a deep love for both mountaineering, the mountaineering community, and all the people who've helped us, which are particularly the people in Nepal and in mountain countries. So I would say that the legacy that George would like to leave was that we in the mountaineering community were continuing with that effort of actually putting things back. I think it's a sense of duty that we have as mountaineers, that we have gained so much in the way of enjoyment, to a degree personal gain and everything else, from the efforts that our Sherpa friends have made to help us achieve that. We owe them something. We actually should put something back. And I think that's very widely felt right the way across the climbing community, not just in Britain but in every country. And I think it's something that we should do and is a delight to do. And of course that is very much what Ed Hillary and George did a terrific amount with the Himalayan Trust.
A, B, C. याद रखो यो के हो यो सी हो बराबर रेखा यतिले त रेखा भएछ अब यता चाहिँ के भयो.
When George became chairman of the Himalayan Trust, he saw that the Khumbu area was now very well provided for by the Himalayan Trust, both in schools, infrastructure and everything else. But there were other areas, particularly around the Kanchenjunga area, which also has a Sherpa community, but also the local people as well, which was nothing like as well kind of supported. And so he was shifting, in fact, the British part of the Himalayan Trust's activity in that direction. The Himalayan Trust today as well is once again making sure that its help is going to the people who really need it, which are in fact the communities slightly off the beaten trail who haven't got hospitals, haven't got schools, do need some further help. And also the key thing is actually helping them to help themselves, which has been very much the philosophy of the Himalayan Trust throughout. George also, of course, put back a terrific amount into our own kind of climbing community. He's a very active Alpine Club member. Of course, he was a very good president of the Alpine Club. And then the British Mountaineering Council, we worked together. When I was president, he was vice president, and he then went on to be a very good president. It was George who actually gave birth to the National Mountaineering Exhibition, which we managed to get going up in Reged near Penrith. And it was once again, it was this enthusiasm that actually enabled that to start.
कुरा भन्नै पर्दाखेरि मैले मेरो विचारमा 10 किलो वास्टी पर्यो
त्यसमा चाहिँ हामीले लु हाम्रो चाहिँ परीक्षा
संस्थाले
यसरी जानु
हाम्रो गुरुबाहरूलाई तालिमले कुरा बुझेर
whole school approach training, sufficient amount of teaching learning materials, key teacher networking, and the major thing,
हातमा हामी पारो
follow the impact of
He was absolutely unflappable. And you know, if things were getting really tense and all gripped up, and George was wonderfully good at just calming the whole thing down. So I think he was an incredibly nice man.